The Humvee lurched to a halt, the sudden silence more jarring than the hours of grinding gears that had preceded it. Sergeant First Class Elias Thorne, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the dust of a dozen foreign countries, twisted around in the passenger seat. His eyes, the color of worn flint, settled on the solitary figure wedged between two mountains of electronic equipment in the back. "All right, Riley, this is your stop. Al-Qidr compound. We'll be back at 0400. You see anything with a pulse and a gun that isn't us, you do not engage. You call it in. We are not here to start a war tonight. We're here to watch one." His voice was a low rasp, accustomed to being heard over rotor wash and gunfire. The figure nodded. Specialist Maya Riley was small, deceptively so, swallowed by the bulky night vision gear and the oversized stock of her M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle. She looked less like a warrior and more like a college student who'd grabbed the wrong bag from the lecture hall. Her face was pale beneath the smears of camouflage paint, but her eyes, a startling shade of green, were calm and utterly still. They were the eyes of a predator in repose. The rear door swung open, admitting a wave of bone-dry, frigid air that smelled of dust and something else, something ancient and unknowable. She slid out, her movements economical, silent. Master Chief Petty Officer Ronan Cross, a mountain of a man from the SEAL team this op belonged to, leaned out. He was their liaison, their ticket to this particular slice of hell. He looked at Riley, then at Thorne, a clear question in his expression. "This is it?" Thorne gave an almost imperceptible nod. Cross's gaze returned to Riley. "Listen, kid, the darkness out here, it's not like back home. It's thick. It plays tricks on you. It's our place. Snipers, we own the night. But you," he paused, searching for the right words that wouldn't shatter what little morale she might have. "You just stay low, keep your head down and watch. We've got 4 other OPs covering the approaches. You see movement, you mark it on the grid. Let the big boys handle it, got it?" Riley looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "I understand, Master Chief. Observe and report." "Good." Cross seemed satisfied. He slapped the side of the Humvee and the vehicle pulled away, its taillights 2 angry red eyes that quickly dissolved into the oppressive blackness. And then there was silence. Riley stood for a full minute, letting the world recalibrate around her. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive. It hummed with the distant, high-pitched whine of a generator from the village a click away. It carried the faint, yipping bark of a jackal. It was the sound of a world holding its breath. Her position was a low rise overlooking a dusty wadi that snaked towards the village of Al-Qidr. The compound was a ghost of a place, a series of crumbling mud brick walls that had once housed a farm. Now, according to intel, it was a way station for a particularly nasty cell moving personnel and weapons across the border. Her job was to sit on this rock pile, watch the compound, and log every single soul that moved in or out. She found her spot, a natural depression between 2 large boulders that offered a perfect panoramic view. She laid out her gear with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 100 times, even if this was her first real-world solo op. The rifle, her heavy, cold companion, was positioned on its bipod, its muzzle barely clearing the rock in front of her. She unfolded a small, sand-colored tarp to lie on, its insulation already fighting a losing battle against the cold leaching up from the earth. She plugged her hearing protection into her ear, a small device that would amplify the slightest sound but protect her eardrums from the cataclysmic crack of her own rifle. Then she waited. Minutes bled into an hour. The moon, a slender sliver, offered almost no light. Her world was the green-hued glow of her night vision. Through it, the compound was a study in stillness. Broken shadows, collapsed roofs, the skeletal remains of a tractor. Nothing. Her mind, trained to find patterns, began to wander. She thought of her father, a hunting guide in the mountains of Montana, who had taught her to shoot before she could properly read. "See the animal, Maya," he'd say. his breath misting in the frigid dawn air. Don't just look at it. See its breath. See the way the light catches its eye. See the muscle twitch under its skin a second before it bolts. That's how you get your shot. You don't shoot the deer, you shoot the moment it decides to move. She was seeing the night the same way now. The way the shadows shifted subtly as a cloud drifted overhead. The way the wind sculpted the dust devils that danced across the wadi floor. She was seeing the terrain, not as a static image, but as a living entity. It was just after 200 when she saw it. Not a person, but a change. A shadow in the northwest corner of the compound, the one she'd mentally tagged as the most defensible, seemed to detach itself from the wall. It coalesced into the figure of a man. He moved with the practiced stealth of an animal, hugging the deeper darkness, pausing for a full 30 seconds behind a broken pillar before sliding into the main building. Riley's heart didn't pound, it simply shifted gears. Her breathing stayed even. Her gloved hand moved to her logbook, and with a tiny red lens flashlight, she recorded the time, the location, and a description. Possible scout, northwest corner, entered main structure, 0213. This was what she was here for. Observe and report. 20 minutes later, the compound woke up. It wasn't a flurry of activity, but a slow, sinister awakening. 2 more men emerged from the main building, their movements urgent. They met a third who seemed to materialize from a hole in the ground near the old tractor. A hasty, whispered conversation. Then they moved. And they were moving in her direction. Riley's blood went cold. They were fanning out, using the terrain, the boulders, the dried-up creek bed. They were sweeping. Had they seen her? Heard something? Was it just a routine patrol? It didn't matter. The why was irrelevant. The what was all that mattered. She was about to be compromised. Her training took over. A cold, clear stream of consciousness cutting through the rising tide of fear. She had 2 choices. Melt away into the night, a ghost in reverse, or stand her ground. Melting away meant abandoning her position, losing the eyes on the target, and potentially walking into a wider cordon. Standing her ground was suicide. She looked at her rifle. Then she looked at the men. There were 3 of them. They were moving like professionals, using bounding overwatch, one moving while the other 2 covered him from positions of concealment. This wasn't a random patrol. This was a deliberate sweep. Her mind replayed Master Chief Cross's words. The darkness is a sniper's domain, not yours. He was wrong. The darkness was impartial. It was a tool, and right now it was the only ally she had. They were moving in the open, silhouetting themselves against the lighter-colored sand of the wadi floor. They thought they were hunters. They were about to become the game. The first man was the point man, moving low and fast from one large rock to another, about 150 meters out. He paused there, scanning, his back to her as he looked towards her last known position. His partner, 30 meters behind him, was behind a small berm, his weapon up, covering the point man's advance. The third was further back near the compound wall, providing rear security. A classic textbook movement. Riley took a deep, silent breath, letting it out slowly through her nose. She didn't have time to think. She had to feel. She slid her eye behind the scope. The reticle, a fine crosshair in the green-tinted world, settled on the back of the point man's neck. Her finger, cold but steady, found the trigger. There was no slack. She was the rifle was her. She felt the connection, a single line of intent from her brain to the tip of the bullet. She fired. The suppressed crack was more of a loud, angry cough, swallowed instantly by the vast emptiness. But the result was immediate and absolute. The point man crumpled, his body folding as if his strings had been cut. He didn't make a sound. She didn't wait to see him fall. Her mind was already on the next target. The second man behind the berm would have heard the thump of the shot, the odd noise that didn't belong. He would be confused for a split second, his eyes searching for the source. He was already turning his head towards his fallen comrade. Riley's crosshairs found him, a perfect profile. The moment he registered the body on the ground, his mouth opening in what would have been a warning, She fired again. Another cough. Another collapse. The second man pitched forward over the berm, his rifle clattering uselessly onto the sand. Chaos. That was the third man's only ally now. He was a professional. He didn't fire wildly. He dropped instantly, disappearing from Riley's sight behind a low rock wall that bordered the compound. He was good. He knew the shot had come from the rise, but the suppressor and the echo made it impossible to pinpoint. He was now a ghost himself, and a terrified one. Riley's mind was a whirlwind of calculations. He was behind the wall. He would try to flank, or call for backup, or simply wait her out. She couldn't let him do any of those things. She had to move. The second she fired, her position was compromised. She grabbed her rifle, ignoring the 50 pounds of gear, and rolled out of her depression, crawling on her belly like a lizard, moving 20 meters to her left to a new, slightly lower position between two smaller rocks. She waited. The silence was back, but it was a different silence. It was a held breath, taut and expectant. She scanned the wall. Nothing. Minutes passed. Had he slipped away? Was he even now circling around behind her? Then, a flicker. Not a movement, but the absence of it. A tiny section of the starry sky behind the wall was momentarily blotted out. He was peeking, just over the top, trying to get a view. He'd moved down the wall, trying a new angle. She had him. The range was point blank for her weapon. She tracked the slight rise of his head, the shape of his helmet. He was looking right at her old position. He was patient. He was good. But he was looking in the wrong place. She fired a third time. The shot was true. The figure behind the wall slumped and was still. 3 bodies, 3 shots. Less than 2 minutes had passed. Riley lay in her new position, her body trembling with the aftermath of a massive adrenaline dump. She forced herself to breathe, slow and deep. Don't look at them. Don't think about them. Scan. The compound. If there were 3, there could be more. Her hunch was right. The single shot she'd heard earlier, the one she'd dismissed, had been a signal. The compound, moments ago a dead zone, was now seething with angry life. Figures were pouring from the main building, from the hole in the ground, from behind walls. She counted. 5, 6, 7, 8. They were agitated, running to the wall, shouting. They knew something was wrong. They hadn't heard the shots clearly, but they knew their men were down. One of them, a leader type, was gesturing wildly, pointing towards the rise. He'd found the bodies with his night vision. He was organizing them. They were going to swarm her. Her mission was over. Observe and report was a joke. It was now survive and report. She had to get a message out. She keyed her radio, her whisper a ghost in the electronic ether. Any station, this is Spartan 6-1. Contact. I am compromised. Multiple hostiles. Request immediate extract. Grid coordinates follow. She rattled off her position. Silence. Static. The low hills were blocking her signal. Panic, a cold, sharp claw scraped at the edges of her mind. She clawed it back. No signal meant no backup. No backup meant she was on her own. For at least 2 hours until the Humvee was scheduled to return. 2 hours against at least 8 pissed-off professional fighters on their home turf. She looked at the terrain with new eyes. She was on a low rise, the high ground, but it was isolated. They would try to flank her, surround her. She couldn't stay here. She had to become the hunter again. She had to use their anger, their haste against them. She began to move, a slow, agonizing crawl, dragging her rifle, keeping her profile lower than a snake's belly. She moved away from her original position, not towards safety, but perpendicular to the enemy's advance, tracing the curve of the rise. She found a new spot, this one with a view of the most likely avenue of approach, a shallow, winding gully that led from the compound up to the rise. She didn't have to wait long. They came in a rush, 5 of them, strung out along the gully, moving fast, too fast. They were relying on speed and numbers. They were making mistakes. They were silhouetting themselves against the lighter sand of the gully floor. They were not using bounding overwatch. They were just moving. Riley chose her first target, the last man in the line. He was the least alert, focused on the backs of his comrades. She fired. One shot. He dropped. The line halted. The four remaining men dove for cover, but the gully offered little. They were pinned, shouting, confused. They hadn't seen the muzzle flash. The suppressor was too good. They just knew death was coming from the darkness. While they were frozen, Riley moved again. She slithered 30 meters further along the ridge, circling them. She now had a different angle on the gully. Two of the men had bunched up behind a single large rock, whispering frantically. A single well-placed shot. The first man's head snapped back. The second man, in his panic, made a run for it, scrambling out of the gully and into the open. It was a fatal error. Riley's next shot caught him in the back as he fled. Two left. They were smarter now. They had gone to ground, hiding in the deepest shadows of the gully, not moving. Riley couldn't see them. They couldn't see her. A stalemate. But a stalemate was a loss for her. As long as they were pinned, they couldn't flank her. But they could call for help. And more would come. Time was a luxury she didn't have. She had to force them to move. She picked up a small rock and tossed it as far as she could to her left, into a patch of scrub brush. The rustle was slight, but in the dead silence it sounded like a rattlesnake. One of the men, his nerves shot, flinched. He shifted his weight, just a tiny movement, but it was enough to displace a small shower of pebbles that rolled down the gully wall. Riley saw the movement in her periphery. It was all she needed. She aimed for the source of the pebbles and fired. A grunt, then silence. The last man. He was the leader, the one she'd seen gesturing. He was cool. He hadn't moved. He was waiting for her to make a mistake. Riley waited too. Minutes passed. The cold was seeping into her bones. Her hands were numb, but she waited. She knew he would have to move eventually. He couldn't stay there forever. And he did. He tried to crawl, a slow, agonizing belly crawl backwards up the gully, trying to escape the kill zone. He was a shadow amongst shadows, but he was moving. Riley tracked him, her crosshairs following his agonizingly slow progress. He was almost out, almost to a point where he could break for the compound. She fired. The last shot echoed and died. Silence returned. The gully was still. 8. She'd counted 8, but her initial count from the compound was 8, plus the first 3. 11. The number echoed in her head, a cold, hard fact. 11 men, in less than an hour. She didn't have time to process it. She had to move. The sound of the last few unsuppressed shots, the panic and the movement had forced her to fire without the suppressor's full effect at times, would have been heard clearly back at the compound. The remaining fighters would be even more cautious or even more enraged. She crawled further, putting as much distance as she could between herself and the gully, circling wide around the compound. She was no longer an observer. She was a wraith, a hunter in the dark. She found a new hide, this one with a clear view of the compound's main entrance and the wadi leading to it. She didn't have to wait for them to come to her. They sent out a new team, 3 men this time. They moved like Zhenjiang professionals, using every inch of cover, communicating with hand signals. They were hunting her. They were good, but she was better. She had the patience of the mountains in her blood. She watched them for 20 minutes, learning their patterns, their pauses, the way their leader twitched his head before changing direction. She saw their rhythm. And when they made a tiny, almost imperceptible mistake, when 2 of them were briefly silhouetted against the sky as they crested a small dune, she was ready. 2 shots. So close together they sounded like one. 2 men dropped. The third, the leader, was a ghost, gone in an instant, buried in the sand. Riley didn't wait. She moved again, circling, always circling. The hunter was now the hunted, and the hunted was now the hunter. She found him, the last man, trying to crawl his way back to the compound. He was terrified, his cool professionalism shattered. He was making noise, soft, desperate whimpers. She found him huddled behind a rock, praying. She didn't feel pity. She felt a cold, clear focus. He was a threat. She neutralized it. 12. No, wait. The 3 from the sweep, the 5 in the gully, the 2 in the wadi, plus the final one. That was... She'd lost count. 9. She'd told herself she'd get 9 before daybreak. It was an arbitrary number, a mental goal to keep her focused. She looked at the eastern horizon. The barest hint of gray was beginning to lighten the sky. Daybreak. The compound was quiet. No more fighters emerged. They were either dead or too terrified to move. She could see figures inside, but they were huddled, defensive, waiting for an attack that wasn't coming. She lay there, her body aching, her mind oddly clear, watching the sun begin to paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The darkness was retreating, and with it, her domain. The sound of rotors was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. 2 Blackhawks crested the hills, fast and low, their shadows sweeping across the desert floor. They were followed by the lumbering shape of the Humvee. She didn't stand up and wave. She stayed low, packed her gear, and only when the first of the SEALs from the chopper had established a perimeter around her did she finally allow herself to move. Master Chief Cross was the first to reach her. His face, usually so stoic, was a mask of disbelief. He looked at her, then at the carnage strewn across the landscape, visible now in the growing light. Bodies lay in the gully, behind rocks, in the wadi, a trail of destruction. His radio crackled, a voice from the compound team. "Master Chief, we have a count. 9 confirmed KIA in the immediate AO. Looks like another 3 near the compound wall. Possibly more. We're still sweeping." Cross stared at Riley, who was calmly taking a sip from her canteen. Her face was streaked with dirt and camo paint, her eyes red-rimmed from staring through a scope all night. She looked exhausted. She looked human. He remembered his words from the night before. "The darkness is a sniper's domain, not yours." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? Riley looked up at him, her expression as calm and still as it had been when she'd stepped out of the Humvee. She gave him a single, slow nod. It wasn't a nod of triumph. It wasn't a nod of arrogance. It was simply a nod of acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that the night was over and she was still standing. The darkness had been her domain, and she had owned it.